We're going to talk about Emily Dickinson, and I'm going to repeat, I'm going to say at the beginning something that I won't repeat in the talk, which is Emily Dickinson's life is very strange, and too often people focus on it, and I think it's a mistake, as you will see from the poems that we're going to read. Uh, Very briefly, she was born in Amherst, Massachusetts, in a house that her family owned part of and then sold and then moved back to. So she was born in the house she lived in basically all her life, although she lived for a little while in another house in Amherst. So her entire life was spent in Amherst. And on top of that, she was very shy, overly so, neurotically so, so that she really didn't meet people. When a good friend of hers came back from a long time away, she only would talk to him through a closed door. So her world consisted of her parents, her sister Lavinia, who lived in the house with her till they both died, her brother Austin, who built a house next door, Austin's wife Susan, who became her very close friend, and her dog. And that was about it. She had a voluminous correspondence. Her letters are pretty remarkable, and we'll read one of them. And among her correspondence, as one of her greatest biographer, Richard Sewell wrote, were a congressman, a judge, a leading minister of the time, a newspaper editor. So she had a really lively life of the mind in some ways, but she was a recluse living in a house in Amherst. And too often people get entranced with that image of, which I think is a very kind of womanly image of the woman locked up in her house and unable to deal with the world. She was, as we said in the discussion at the beginning, remarkably tough-minded, and her life was extremely rich, as I hope to show to you in coming hour and a half. So without, let me just turn a timer on so I know how much time we've got. Okay. When she was fairly young, although already writing poetry, she wrote to a man named Thomas Wentworth Higginson, who had written a letter to a young poet in Atlantic magazine. And she wrote him saying, would you read some of my poems? Can you tell me if these poems live? Is what she wrote. And Higginson was himself an extraordinary figure who commanded the 1st Black Regiment in the Civil War, who was a lifelong fighter for feminism, who was a socialist, who was a great intellectual, and who was to become the editor of her first book of poetry. Dickinson's niece and Higginson discovered some of her poems in drawers and published them. So she's mostly a posthumous poet. Between 6 and 10 of her poems were published in her lifetime. They're about a little short of 1,800 poems, all of them astonishingly good. The poems were discovered in this drawer in what are called fascicles, which are little bound, handwritten sheets of paper with the poems, and the bindings were sewn by her with needle and thread. And they were about 16 pages long. There are volumes of the fascicles, photocopies, and one of you sent me kindly a copy of a fascicle of one of the poems we're going to do. So we know her poems only because they were published after her death, and her orthography was strange, that is, the spelling and the capitalization, and she used dashes rather than punctuation. Whether the dashes were her way of writing or whether she rested her pen, nobody knows. But these were fair copies, and we know her primarily through her poems, and that's what we're going to look at. In her letter to Higginson, she wrote this. She said, he asked for a photograph of her, and she said, can you believe me, without, I had no portrait, excuse me, I'm going to move some things around here. I had no portrait now, but am small like the wren, and my hair is bold like the chestnut burr, and my eyes like the sherry in the glass that the guest leaves. Would this do just as well? For me, that's always served as the great portrait of Dickinson, small like a wren, bold, reddish brown hair, eyes of kind of a brown like the sherry in the glass that the guest leaves. We do have one portrait of her. This is the famous portrait of Dickinson, which is all we had, and she looks like she described herself. Interestingly and amazingly, a literary scholar uncovered another portrait of Dickinson in middle age, and here's that portrait. She's this one right here on the left. She's older, obviously, than in the first photo. Those are the only two we have. She lived, as I said, in this house in Amherst. She moved away for a while and then moved back. She was born in this house and died in this house. It was her parents' house. Her father was a lawyer and a secretary to Amherst College. The house is still there, it can be visited. I haven't actually visited it. Some of you may have. So we're going to start, because these are about New England poets, with a poem called The Robin's My Criterion for Tune. And I would, well, here's a robin. Robins are especially a New England bird, and this is what she's going to tell us in the poem. The poem also talk about buttercups, and it will also talk about common field daisies, all of which are things she would have grown up with in New England. And also nuts, and I think she's probably thinking of chestnuts. America, as you probably know, one of the great evolutionary catastrophes. America, the United States, was mostly treed by chestnuts, and they were all wiped out by a blight. So the chestnuts we see now are not American chestnuts, but that's the nut she talks about in the poem. And what she tells us in this poem is that her criterion for what counts as a poem or as music is what she's surrounded by in her New England provincial surroundings, and provincial is going to end the poem. The robin's my criterion for tune, because I grow where robins do. But were I cuckoo born, cuckoos live in England, not in the United States, I'd swear by him. The ode familiar rules the noon. That which we know is what decides how we will see and write about the world. The buttercup's my whim for bloom, because we're orchard sprung. But were I Britain born, I'd daisy spurn. The British have different kinds of daisies than we do. None but the nut, October 5th, that's those chestnuts, because through dropping it, the seasons flit. So she knows it's fall because the nuts fall from the tree. I'm taught without the snow's tableau, winter were lie to me. So if she didn't have snow, she wouldn't know what winter was. Because I see New Englandly, the queen discerns like me provincially. I start with this not only because she declares herself as a New England poet, but because she sees New Englandly. This is in great contradistinction in some ways. Well, I'll wait till we get to the poem. This was a poet to talk about Baudelaire. Here's a poem that I really adore. It's a late poem of hers. It's very short, and I think most people jump over it, and I think wrongly. We introduce ourselves to planets and to flowers, but with ourselves have etiquettes, embarrassments, and awes. If we think about that poem, we say, yeah, that's right. With people, we sometimes have elaborate rules we follow, that's the etiquettes. And sometimes we're kind of embarrassed, and sometimes we can't believe what we or they are feeling. That's the awes. I think the poem turns on something we'll look at quite a bit, which is the ambiguity of that ourselves. Because I think the ourselves is not only other selves, the ourselves of we're in this Zoom class ourselves, but our own self. I have a self, you have a self. And if we read it that way, the poem is deeper, richer, and more disquieting. With my own self, I have etiquettes, embarrassments, and laws. I have rules, I have shames, I have things that stun me by their immensity. So it's a very small poem, which, in a sense, tells us two things. It tells us about our relations with others, but then if we read that ourselves as meaning also our own self, it tells us about the complexity of the self's relation to itself. Now, here's a poem called This Was a Poet, and I'm going to start out with, I figured we couldn't do this without paying attention to one of the limitations, which turned out not to be a limitation at all, of Emily Dickinson. She wrote in something known as common meter. It's also the meter of ballad, so it's called ballad meter. And it's also called hymn meter because that was the meter in which hymns were primarily written. So this would be the meter of the world in which she was a part. In church, people would write stanzas. I actually use fancy terms here: alternating iambic, tetrameter, and trimeter. And that means there are 4 beats to the first line and 3 beats to the next line, and 4 beats and 3 beats. And as you can see, even in this poem, which begins regularly in line 3, there isn't that final stress. So she's going to play around with it all the time. And she's also going to play around with the rhymes, which occur usually between lines 2 and 4, sense and immense. You'll notice that this poem will end up, let me just move this out of the way, with harm and time. That's called a slant rhyme. Harm, time, not exactly a rhyme like immense and sense, but not exactly not a rhyme. There's a sound that they have in common. So this is the poem as we read it. It's a pretty irregular poem. Some of the ones we'll do are much more regular, but I started with this one, and as you can see, every one of the second and fourth lines is in iambic trimeter, ba-dum, ba-dum, ba-dum. And the first line is tetrameter, ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. So it's ba-dum, 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 ba-dum. But she's going to vary it with a lot of kind of dangling syllables, so that often there are only 7 beats to a line. And I won't dwell further on this other than to inform you that all her poems, all of them, in some ways or another, are based on common meter or hymn meter, and sometimes very directly and sometimes less so. So let's look at this poem. The first part is in red because that, to me, is the most important and meaningful part, but the second part is pretty great too. I tend to slough it off. Of pictures the discloser, the poet, it is he entitles us by contrast to ceaseless poverty. She didn't feel impoverished by living in Western Massachusetts in a small town. She understood that as a poet, she lived a rich life. As an early critic of hers defending her said she lived what was perhaps the richest imaginative life ever lived on this continent. A portion so unconscious the robin could not harm, himself to him a fortune exterior to time. Poems. There's that old Latin phrase, vita brevis, ars longus. Life is short and art is long. Poems endure outside of time. So she understood that. But let's look at those first 8 lines. She's writing, it is thought, about Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was a poet. It's a great essayist. Maybe not as great a poet. Certainly not as great as Emily Dickinson. And these 8 lines are built around a comparison, a metaphor, in which a poet is like a perfumer who makes perfumes, who takes flowers and presses the liquid out of flowers and then distills that liquid down into the essence of that flower's fragrance that's called an adder, which you'll see in the fourth line. And that perfume lasts and brings back to us the scent of the flowers. This was a poet. It is that distills amazing sense from ordinary meanings. I said I'd talk about a French poet of the period, Charles Baudelaire, who wrote it at literally the same time as Emily Dickinson, really established our notion of the bohemian poet, that you wander through the city and you take drugs and you imbibe in a lot of sex and you push the edges of experience. And he also wrote a lot about how we need to travel far to experience new things. Emily Dickinson didn't buy any of that. It's from the familiar species that perish by the door that we get our perfumes, our poems. The amazing sense from ordinary meanings. An adder so immense from the familiar species that perished by the door, we wonder it was not ourselves arrested it before. As I read over this poem, I thought of my absolute favorite lines from Walt Whitman, where he says near the end of Song Myself, he says, I do not say these things for $1 or to fill up the time while I wait for a boat. That Whitman is very good. He's as good as Dickinson. Dickinson wrote in a letter to Dickinson that she heard he was dirty and she didn't read him. But he says, I'm not just talking because I get paid or to fill up the time because I have nothing else to do. I do not say these things. Let me add the quote here. So I do not say these things for $1 or to fill up the time while I wait for a boat. It is you talking just as much as myself. I act as the tongue of you tied in your mouth. In me, it begins to be loosened. So Dickinson is saying something very similar in these last two of these red lines. We could all see what she sees if only we stopped and captured it, arrested it, took it out of time and made it himself to him a fortune exterior to time. We could all do this. And I think what's so extraordinary about this is that the poet distills amazing sense from ordinary meanings, from her New England setting and background. And here we're going to see that amazingly. It's such a wonderful poem. This is called The Angle of a Landscape. Actually, these are all wonderful poems, so I'm going to say that again and again. And it's very simple. And the only thing I need to explain to you is she'll use the word Venetian. And in the 19th century, based on stuff that was written about them in the 14th and 15th and 16th centuries, Venetians were known as the central place where you could find assassins. And when she says a Venetian, she means by someone who assaults, meaning harm. Every morning she's accosted by what she sees when she opens her eyes. So that's the Venetian in the poem. This is her bedroom in her house. It's been redone. This is again her bedroom. Now, I think if you look at this picture, you want to forget those Levallois shades, which are very modern, and sense that she had kind of drapes on her window. And what she's talking about is between the window frame and the drape, there's a little bit of sky that you can see from her bed. And that's what the poem is about. It's about that little bit of sky that she can see from her bed. I mean, it's not a lot to write a poem about, and yet the angle of a landscape that every time I wake between my curtain and the wall upon an ample crack. You'll get that, right? It's between the curtain and the window frame. She's just a little bit of the world, like a Venetian. It just grabs me. I mean, it's very strong language in some ways. Like a Venetian waiting across my open eye, it's just a bough of apples held slanting in the sky. So much there. She looks out her window and she sees a bough of apples. She also sees the pattern of a chimney. And as you know, bricklayers, especially in the 19th century, when they're very skilled, can make patterns out of bricks. So that here in Vermont, there's a famous checkerboard house, for instance, on the road to Essex, from Essex to Richmond, where you turn off to go to Essex. the pattern of a chimney, the forehead of a hill. We still use that metaphor, the brow of a hill, right, the top of a hill. That's what she sees. She's a green of an apple tree, a chimney with its pattern, the top of a hill, and sometimes, it's like a finger, the weather vane on top of the steeple of a church. But that's occasional, and I think the occasional here, it's a difficult line, is not what we might think the vane's forefinger, because it's going to come up at the end, but what's occasional is that green branch of the apple tree outside her window. Because the seasons shift my picture. Upon my emerald bough, that green bough of the apple tree, I wake to find no emeralds. It's fall and the leaves are falling. And then another season comes. Then, season, diamonds, which the snow from polar caskets fetched me. So it's gone from green branch to bare branch to snow-covered branch. The chimney and the hill and just the steeple's finger, these never stir at all. She's a poem about a thunderstorm and how extraordinarily powerful it was. And it tells her, this is the last line of the poem, how much can come and much can go and still abide the world. And I think this poem is about those things that change and those things that endure, and about how she wakes up to the enduring world and also the changing seasons. It's about transience, change on the one hand, and permanence on the other. It's about waking up to a world that is actually out there for us. And I mean, what I find stunning about this poem is it's a poem about lying in bed, looking at the window and seeing just a little sliver outside, and she makes a poem out of that. And I find it pretty astonishing. It's a very New England poem. I think of this as a New England poem. It may not be, it could also be a Midwestern poem, but it's clearly a mid-19th century poem. And the poem is built on a contrast between leaving a neighbor's house and the neighbor holding up a light and saying, here, let me light you on your way a little bit. And you go out down to the road, and it's pretty dark and you can't see so well because you've been inside light, and maybe there's a little bit of moon and a little bit of stars, and you kind of adjust to the darkness and you make your way home without light. And then she says, and then of inner darknesses. So she's going to compare that, leaving the neighbor's house and the light, going into the dark, to the inner darkness where we leave the world that seems lighted and head into the inner dark. Whatever that is, I don't know. I'm telling you the truth, I don't know. And so let's look at the poem. We grow accustomed to the dark when light is put away, as when the neighbor holds the lamp to witness her goodbye. A moment, we uncertain step for newness of the night, then fit our vision to the dark and meet the road erect. So stand up straight and we walk. And we've gotten used to, we fit our vision to the dark. We've gotten used to the darkness and we can make our way home. And here's the comparison. And so of larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain when not a moon discloses sign or star come out within. This is pitch dark. This is dark, dark. And there are inner darknesses, larger darknesses, those evenings of the brain. The bravest grope a little and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead. So that in the inner darkness, you grope, and maybe even bang into something. It's pretty sudden, and sometimes hit a tree directly in the forehead. But as they learn to see, either the darkness alters, as happens to the woman who's leaving a friend's house with the light, and it's a little moonlight or starlight, and they learn how to find their way on the road. Either the darkness alters, or something in the sight adjusts itself to midnight, and life steps almost straight. And I'm unbelievably moved by that almost. It's not the same. When we have the inner darkness, we will never march the same way as we did before. You know, we meet the road erect here, And in this line, the life steps almost straight. We can't quite be erect. We have dealt with the darkness and we've tried to adjust to it, but it's not the same. That almost, I think, carries enormous freight. Well, it's New England-y in the sense, I'm not trying to force these bumps in, it's a 19th century small town country pub. My wife and I went on a walk the other day. I live in the middle of Burlington, and there are occasionally snowflakes drifting by, only a couple. And it was, for those of you who are in Vermont, so many of our recent days have been very gray, and the clouds seemed to hang low, and it was kind of depressing. And that's what this poem is about. The sky is low, the clouds are mean. It's a very short poem. It's only 8 lines, and the only word you might want to know about is diadem, which is not a crown, but actually a band of jewels that goes around the head. Here's a famous lady you all know, and her famous diadem. That's her diadem. It's not her crown, it's her diadem. So now you know what a diadem is. The sky is low, the clouds are mean. A traveling flake of snow across a barn or through a rut debates if it will go. A narrow wind complains all day how someone treated him. Nature, like us, is sometimes caught without her diadem. And if you pay attention to the words in the poem, low, mean, narrow, complain, treated badly. I mean, nature is here revealed as without her crowning glories. Nature is treated as like that day was when we went for a walk. This is so far from the world of mountains and lakes and trees and glorious vistas and a host of daffodils that Wordsworth wrote about. And I love Wordsworth, and I think he saw some of the terror in nature, but this is nature unenchanted. And someone said before class began, they expected a romantic poet, and she's not a romantic poet, romantic with a capital R. This is an anti-romantic poem. This is a poem about how the world and nature sometimes are without redeeming qualities that somehow enlighten us and enlarge us, that nature can be low and mean and full of complaints. This is another, I love all these poems. This is called Apparently with No Surprise. She wrote a number of poems about this phenomenon, about the blonde assassin, she calls it in this poem. Blonde assassin means the frost, and you can see the frost on this flower. And the blonde assassin beheads a flower. You can see this flower has been hit by a hard freeze, and the flower droops over. We've all experienced that, I think, in northern climes. This is such a tough one. Apparently, with no surprise to any happy flower, the frost beheads it at its play in accidental power. The blonde assassin passes on. The sun proceeds unmoved to measure off another day for an approving God. There's so much in this poem. The flower is not surprised at being knocked off by the frost, and not just knocked off. This is brutal, right? Beheaded. Apparently, with no surprise to any happy flower, the frost beheads it at its play. It's playing, and then it dies, and it's not surprised. William Butler Yeats, in a kind of middle poem, not too late, not too early, said, "Man knows death to the bone. Man has created death." It's we human beings with our consciousness that understand and have to cope with death. And she's suggesting in these first lines of the poem that flower's happy, gets beheaded. Yeah, well, that's the way it goes. The flower doesn't know, doesn't care. But then this fourth line is so unbelievably stunning. An accidental flower. It's like the frost happened today instead of yesterday or the day after. The frost doesn't, it's just the weather. It doesn't even know that it's killing off the flowers. we're going to have this in contradistinction to the most famous saying of Albert Einstein, quoted all the time. You know, Einstein was a very great man and a very great mind. He says, I'll read it to you. He says, God does not play dice with the universe. For Emily Dickinson, God plays dice with the universe. Accidental power. The blonde assassin, I've already told you that's the cross. The blonde assassin passes on. The sun proceeds unmoved. And I don't think this has to do, it may have to do with our awareness that the sun is the center of the solar system and the planets revolve around the sun. But I think the unmoved really has to do in this poem, in this context, with the absolute uncaringness of the sun, unmoved, emotionally doesn't care. The sun proceeds unmoved to measure off another day for an approving God. This is a stunning poem about how the heading of flowers and death and terminal change comes to the world. And God says, okay, that's the way it goes. I find nothing in Melville or Hawthorne, who go into the dark places in the human heart, as hard-eyed as this poem, this short poem. Again, it's a poem about her garden. She writes about her garden. She writes about the things in New England that she sees. Here's another garden poem. A bird came down the walk. My friend Clem, who's on this in this class, is a bird watcher. Another friend of mine, Judith Romero, is also going to listen to this poem. She couldn't make it to this class. Also a bird watcher. She's observing a bird immensely carefully in this poem. And I think it comes to us like, oh yeah, well, it's just a poem, but I think it's a profound poem. A bird came down the walk. He did not know I saw. He bit an angleworm in halves and ate the fellow raw. Right? So the bird's hopping along, and it eats a worm. And here's a picture of a bird and a worm. And you can see how gross it is. Claude Lévi-Strauss wrote a whole series of books, one of which was called The Raw and the Cooked, about the basic oppositions between the natural and the human world. And the natural world eats things raw, and we need them cooked. We need them, human beings, to go over them. This bird is at one with a world of worms. It just eats the worm, and it exists in a different size frame than us. It's going to get sustenance from drinking dew from grass. We couldn't subsist on that. We'd die of thirst. And then he hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. The bird and the beetle exist in the same world, whereas beetles are those little things on the ground that, you know, we've noticed and maybe even step on. And then he drank a dew from a convenient grass, then hopped sideways to the wall to let a beetle pass. He glanced with rapid eyes and hurried all around. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. Then stirred his velvet head like one in danger. Now, I'm going to show you two photos of robins that I found. And I want you to, you know, we've all seen robins. And robins' eyes, all birds' eyes, that move very, very rapidly. I knew a man once who studied sight, and even human beings' eyes move infinitesimally, always moving, because we put together little pieces of what we see we stitch them together into the whole of what we think we see, which is everything. But we're only seeing little bits of things, and birds especially see only little bits of things. So these eyes are like beads. Of course they are. They're round and they're small and they're shiny. And they're like frightened beads because they move around, they skitter. They're not at rest. But that fright, I think, prepares us for what's going to come next. Here's another one. And he stirs his velvet head. Look at that velvet head. That is a velvet head. She's looking at that bird and its eye. He Let me go back to that area. He glanced with rapid eyes and hurried all around. They looked like frightened beads, I thought. He stirred his velvet head like one in danger. Cautious, I offered him a crumb. And let me slow down the poem. One of the things that I learned about reading poems is we have to go through them sometimes very slowly because we tend to read what we already know. And if the poem is going to tell us what we don't know, we have to go slow and be prepared for it to tell us what we haven't already pre-read into the poem. So that, like one in danger, our quick reading tells us, oh yeah, the bird's in danger. Like, she's very good about that. And I think it's true. The bird is like one in danger. Of course, here's this big creature called Emily Dickinson, and I have bird feeders in my backyard. I go out there, they fly away. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb. But the danger here is to Emily Dickinson as well as the bird. Like one in danger, cautious, I offered him a crumb. The like one in danger doesn't just modify bird and its rapid eyes, but also modifies I. We're offering the crumb because she is in great danger. And here comes the danger. I offered him a crumb, so she's saying, here, birdie, have a little bit of bread. And you know what happens if you go outside and say to the bird, here, birdie, here's a piece of bread. And he unrolled his feathers and rode him softer home, and oars divide the ocean, two silver for a sea. Just gorgeous things. And what the metaphor here is the bird is flying off into the sea, but it's the sea of air. And it's too silver for a sea. It leaves no wake. There's no disturbance. You or I jump into a lake or an ocean and we do our swimming, we leave a wake, we leave a pattern behind us. But the bird is in one with this element as we are not with the elements of our world. And he unrolled his feathers and he's rowing without a wake, right? And rowed him softer home than oars divide the ocean, too silver for a seam, or butterflies off banks at noon leap flashless when they swim, as they swim. So there's no splash from butterflies. There's no wake from the bird flying through the air. And the only thing left is Emily Dickinson with a crumb, this big human being who is, in fact, not at home in the world in the way that the birds and the butterflies are. I find it a poem of great power about, it's a big word, about the alienation that we have from the natural world in which we find ourselves. And she sees herself as an alien creature. She says in a letter to Dickinson, she says she's the only kangaroo among the beauty. Here's that letter. It's the same letter in which she says that she's small like the wren. She says, I read her letters and I'm stunned at what she puts into a letter. And the fierceness and particularity and the clarity of her mind, amazing. Will you tell me you might fall frankly as to yourself, for I had rather wince than die? This line is brilliant. Men do not call the surgeon to commend the bone, but set it, sir, and fracture within is more critical. Tell me how to be better. Don't tell me I'm good for what I've done. Tell me what's wrong. And then she plays a little girl, right? I'm Emily. And for this preceptor I shall bring you obedience, the blossom from my garden, and every gratitude I know. And then she says, aha, you think I'm a little girl, don't you? Perhaps you smile at me. I could not stop for that. My business is circumference. I don't know if any of us could say that. I couldn't. My business is outer bound of the whole thing. My business is circumference. So if I'm uncomfortable in the world, it's because I'm looking for the big things. And ignorance not of customs, but if caught with the dawn or the sunset, see me, myself, the only kangaroo among the beauty. So she feels, as I'm suggesting she felt in that previous poem, as if she is left bereft in this world, which is all of a piece, and she doesn't quite belong. She's this ungainly, odd, weird creature. The only kangaroo from the beauty. This is, if I had to pick a favorite poem of Dickinson's, it's probably this one. I tie my hat, I crease my shawl. And I found in looking around for a picture of a bonnet, because it's about tying a hat on, a bonnet, and creasing a shawl, a scarf that she's going to put around her as she goes outside. She's not going to go outside without her hat and her shawl against the coolness of the air. And this is a poet by a painting by an itinerant folk painter named Ami Phillips. He painted in 1836, which is about 25 years before she wrote this poem. It's called A Woman with a Shawl. I think Emily Dickinson, to my mind, is younger than this, and the bonnet is not as ornate as this, and the shawl with this paisley edging is probably not quite as fancy as this, but still it's a bonnet and a shawl. I tie my hat, I crease my shawl, life's little beauties do. Go out to the garden, you gotta put your hat on and your shawl on. Precisely as the very least were infinite to me. But she's going to be very precise about it, as if the smallest thing she does is she needs to take infinite care of. And we'll want to ask why. Why is it so important that she tie her hat and crease her shawl quite as she does? And she's going to tell us. She's going out to the garden to cut some flowers and put them in the dining room vase and throw the old flowers away, and a petal will lodge on her dress frock. I put new blossoms in the glass and throw the old away. I push a petal from my gown that anchored there. We have to have a clue if we're reading slowly and carefully that this is very strange. The petal is anchoring, a petal, thin, light, gossamer, almost like air, and it's anchoring. The words are just clinging tight and a heft that keeps things tied down. I push a petal from my gown that anchored there. I weigh the time till 6 o'clock. I have so much to do. No, we talk that way. That's our convention. We weigh time in our hands and say, oh my God, I got a lot of things to do. I got to arrange these flowers, and I got to set the table, and I got to help. I got to prepare for dinner, and I have to cook dinner, and I have to take the plates off the table. I have to wash the plates, and maybe I have to do a little laundry, or maybe I did it earlier. I have to fold it now, and maybe I have to sweep the parlor so it's ready for the day again tomorrow, and I have to turn down the bed and go to bed. All these things she has to do. And the ones till 6 o'clock are the daily duties, right? The things of the day. I weigh the time 'twill be till 6 o'clock. I have so much to do, and yet, powerful words, existence, some way back, stopped, struck my ticking through. Oh, she's telling us in no uncertain terms that life is over. Existence, some way back, stopped. Her heart may keep beating, but really, she is mortally wounded by something. And then she says, yeah, well, I died, but I didn't die. I have to keep on going. We cannot put ourselves away as a completed man or woman. When the errand's done, we came to flesh and blood. This is what I wanted from life, and I'm not going to get it. But I have to keep going. That's why she has to do all those things, those little duties do, with such exactness and such care. We cannot put ourselves away as a completed man or woman. When the errand's done, we came to flesh upon. There may be miles on miles of naught. I mean, these lines are just extraordinary. All all ahead of her lies emptiness. And yonder all before us lie deserts of vast eternity, says Marvell in that poem, of a very different sort. Yeah. There's emptiness, miles and miles, and there's this abstraction of naught, of zeros, of nothingness. And then she said, there's something worse than going through the emptiness. She says, we cannot put ourselves away as a completed man or woman. When the errand's done, we came to flesh upon. There may be miles on miles of naught, of action, sicker far. If it's hard to go through nothingness, it's even harder to go through all those life's little beauties that she talked about at the opening of the poem. To simulate, to pretend, we're going to get to the word simulate in the next poem too. To simulate is stinging work. It's so hard and it hurts me so badly. To simulate is stinging work. To cover what we are from science and from surgery. Science is about knowing, surgery is about medicine and healing. So those who would try to know and understand us are those who would try to help and heal us. To cover what we are from science and from surgery, two telescopic eyes to bear on us unshaded for their sake, not for ours. It's like this, if you look at the sun through a telescope, it would burn your optic nerve. He says if somebody could see what's within the devastation, we're going to get to the devastation in a minute, they would be blinded. Because they'd be looking closely and they'd say, oh, that's what's within her. For their sake, not for ours. Would start them, startle, and also maybe begin them to thinking about what is life all about. We ourselves, you and me, reader and her, but she means I, we could tremble, but since we got a bomb and held it in our bosom, and I love this correction of grammar. The devastation within, that bomb that exploded inside her, the explosion is ongoing. The past tense of held it turns to the present tense of hold it. But since we got a bomb and held it in our bosom, they hold it. It is calm. It's calm because everything is devastating to them. Therefore, we do life's labor, though life's reward be done, with scrupulous exactness to hold our senses on. This is at the start of this class. One of the things that I maybe did overboard in teaching, and we're going to go into this now, is deal with the pain that she feels and the scrupulous exactness with which she observes not only robins coming down the walk and what's in between her curtain and the wall, but the pain that she feels from her just checking the time. Sorry. So that scrupulous exactness we'll get to in a moment. This is why she deals with pain. I like a look of agony. It's one poem connected to the red word, truth. I like a look of agony because I know it's true. And then these three words in blue have to do with pretend. And do not sham convulsion or simulate a throe. The eyes glaze once, and that is death, impossible to feign. The beads upon the forehead by homely anguish strung. How do we know it's true? Some things can't be lied about, and can't be pretended. And pain is one of them, she says. I'm not sure if she's right, but I think for her poems she's right. And notice the death in the second stanza. It's so homely. There's that word homely right there. I'm sorry. When people die, there's a sweat of hold on to life and anguish, agony has put them there, and there's no faith in that. She says no faith in that. So that's why she's going to talk about death and despair and pain. This is also a remarkable poem. It's a poem which tries to describe something that is indescribable. And we know it's indescribable because she starts off saying, I want to tell you about something, and it starts off with four nots: not death, not night, not frost, not fire. It's not these things. It was not death, for I stood up, and all the dead lie down, corpses are flat on the ground. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues for noon. Bong, 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 you hear the church bells. It's noontime, it can be nighttime. And I think there's a hint of put out their bells of her being the only kangaroo among the beauty. And the bells are the clappers, and the tongues are the clappers in the bells, but they're also kind of a ridicule, and we're going to get that in stairs later in the poem. It was not night, for all the bells put out their tongues for noon. It was not frost, for on my flesh I felt hot desert winds, siroccos crawl, so she's got heat flashes all over her. Nor fire, for just my marble field heat could keep a chancel cool. I feel cold in the extremities. So it's not death, it's not night, it's not frost, it's not fire, and yet it tasted like them all. The figures I have seen set orderly for burial reminded me of mine. And then another of these, the whole poem is astonishing, but the next stanza is, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame and could not breathe without a key. Remember that first line? I'm going to go back. It was not death, for I stood up and all the dead lie down. It's like she's living in a coffin and she can't breathe. She's so tightly caught up in this whatever it is that is afflicting her, which we'll learn by the end of the poem. Yeah, I think for those of you who are interested, as I am, in the question of what it was like to be a woman writing truly great poetry in the middle of the 19th century, when only men were afforded the title of poet, or mostly men, and you lived in a little town and nobody thought you could do anything. I think this stanza tells us not only about what she's feeling about other things, but also what it was like to be a 19th century small-time woman poet, as if my life were shaven and fitted to a frame and could not breathe without a key. And even though she said it was not night, it was not only not night, it was like midnight, like the middle of the night, sun. And another of these remarkable stanzas, when everything that ticked has stopped and space stares all around. What an image. Everything that is alive stops, and space stares all around. It's like the bells sticking out their tongues, and all there is her. A grisly frost first autumn morns appeal the beating ground. She said in the previous stanza, if we can return, it was not frost around my flesh, I felt siroccos crawl. It's like midnight, not night, but midnight, not frost, but killing frost. A grisly frost first autumn morns repeal the beating ground, but most like chaos, stopless cool without a change or spar. And the change, nothing can change. And there's no ship on the horizon that could come and rescue her, the spar on the distant horizon, or even a report of land. And I think she's thinking of maybe of Noah's Ark and the bird, the dove coming with an olive branch in its beak and saying that there is solid ground. The waters will recede, you will be saved. There's nothing. So she is beyond change, beyond hope of salvation, beyond ground she can stand on. She is hopeless. And so she's beyond all of that. And it's like chaos. No order, no meaning, no anything that could redeem. And it goes on forever. It's stopless. And it's not a feverish feeling. It's just this cool, I am lost. Most like chaos, stopless, cool, without a change or a spar or even a report of land to justify despair. So the poem, if we can say anything about it, it's a poem about being beyond despair and being in a place in which things cannot be described. It's not death, it's not night, it's not ice, it's not fire, and yet it tasted like them all. And she is beyond despair, mired in this. Let's go on to another poem. It's somewhat similar. This is called I Felt a Funeral in My Brain. Long ago, when I taught this, I said, well, it could be a migraine headache, bong, 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 it's going to go like that. Yeah, it's a good description of a beating headache. But it also could be that she's sitting at a funeral, because the imagery is all of funerals. And it could also be that she is responding to the death of someone. Whitman says in some self-wonderful line, he talks about the singing of the Mon Amour chard. He says, these irretrievable. You don't come back from death and loss. When people are lost, they are gone. And so you'll notice in this poem, everything that comes from funerals, funeral, mourners, drum beats, the boxes, the coffin, the boots of lead, lead-lined coffins, and then in the next thing, the bell ringing in the church, and then going to the graveyard where the coffin rests on a plank and then is lowered into the grave. I felt a funeral in my brain, and listen to the rhythms of this. This woman could deal with sounds. I felt a funeral in my brain, and mourners to and fro kept treading, till it seemed that sense was breaking through, and when they all were seated, a service like a drum kept beating, till I thought my mind was going numb. Let me just stop there and call your attention to the fourth line. Again, an ambiguity. Its sense was breaking through. It's like someone has died and the sense of it has somehow broken through. Life does not go on forever. So it's like the sun breaking through the clouds. It's one meaning of the word. And the other meaning is I walked on a rotten floor, and all of a sudden the floorboards gave way, and I broke through and fell down into the cellar. So there are two meanings to breaking through, and I think you'll see the breaking through will come back at the end in that second meaning, which is related to the first, being aware of death and also breaking through into senselessness. That both of those will combine in that final extraordinary finish to the poem. And then I heard them lift a box and creak across my cell with those same beats of lead again, and now the bellows ringing, bong, bong, bong. And the stanza that comes next is again almost, you don't see how she could have written it. With those same boots of lead again, then space began to toll, as all the heavens were a bell, and being but an ear, and I in silence, some strange race wrecked solitary here. What? It's assembly, right? As, like, it's like all the heavens are a bell. It's going bong, 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 and the only thing in the world is, all of being is an ear. It's just taking in this noise that is shattering. So all there is this horrible sound and reception of that horrible sound. And that's all there is. And she's wrecked. And I have silenced some strange race wrecked solitary here. She's wrecked by the sound. Alone. And the bell keeps ringing. And then a plank in reason broke. And I dropped down and hit a world at every plunge and finished knowing that. So here's sense breaking through. A plank in reason broke. As a coffin tumbles into the grave, so does her awareness of what death and endings are: final, immutable, non-reversible. And then a plank in reason broke, and I dropped down and hit a world at every plunge and finished knowing then. Kind of side like that. Long ago, used to read a philosopher named Ludwig Wittgenstein. Didn't understand his first book. Understood his later books, but the first book was too hard. It begins, the world is everything that is the case, and it ends with this extraordinary line, which I've never forgotten, and which I think tells us what's going on at the end of his poem, Wobei man nicht sprechen kann, darüber muss man schweigen. Where one cannot speak thereof, one must be silent. She has fallen beneath the capacity of language to say anything. Finished note, and she's still falling. And I think one of the things that one honors about Emily Dickinson is her willingness to go with language as far as language can go, and then when it can go no farther, to say, there's more there, but I can't say. And I think that's what she's saying here. And the next poem ends in the same way. It's a bit shorter, again, funeral imagery. We have this very strange way, most of us, of dealing with death. We go to funerals and everybody puts on their best clothes and sits upright and lets the minister or the rabbi tell us how and what to feel. And she says that's what happens after great pain. It's like a funeral. And again, there's this conjoining of pain and funerals, of pain and loss. So the pain she's writing about, I think, is loss here. Death is the irrefutable and irretrievable loss. And the imageries of funerals, formal feeling, tombs, stiffness, mechanically marching in a funeral cortege. Not feeling anything anymore, regardless. Headstones, maybe. Quartz contentment. That middle stanza is something. The lead that lines the coffins. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. And we know that's the case physiologically. And people have too great a pain to go into shock. It's blotted out. After great pain, a formal feeling comes. The nerves sit ceremonious like tombs. The stiff heart questions, was it he that bore yesterday or centuries before? I don't think this is the dead person. I think this is a live person whose time has been ruptured here. I know the word sounds fancy. Time has been split from before when the person was living to after when the person is dead and gone. And so it makes no sense, yesterday or centuries ago. And then this middle stanza, again, I find phenomenal. It's not my feet, it's not our feet. It's the disembodied feet. The feet mechanical go round of ground or air or ought. They march along on the ground, they move through the air, they do what they ought to do, which is to march in the funeral procession. The feet mechanical go round of ground or air or ought, a wooden way, regardless grown, a quartz contentment like a stone. Maybe like many of you, sometimes I long for contentment, but the contentment I long for is, green valleys and distant hills and sunshine. I don't think any of us wants a quartz contentment. This is the hour of lead, boy, is it heavy. Remembered if outlived it, you can remember it. Go on. As freezing persons recollect the snow, first chill, then stupor, then the letting go. She can tell us what happens after the letting go. Between that and the outliving, words can't go there. But blanket reason has indeed broken. She has fallen into unconsciousness. And about that which the language can't accompany us, the language can't describe. Okay, so we got one more poem in my original thing, and then we'll go through 3 poems pretty quickly. I think there's time. There's also a New England poem. It really is a New England poem. This is not a California poem. There's no way. There's a certain slant of light, and this is not a great picture. It's the best I could find it. It's about that light that we all have seen in New England. Many of you are, most of you are in New England. At the end of the day in winter, it's a slanting light that brings no warmth and indicates that darkness is coming soon. And you'll notice that she talks about 2 kinds of endings here. Winter afternoons, winter being the ending season of the year, afternoon being the end of the day before the night comes. There's a certain slant of light winter afternoons that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. And I put in margin here synesthesia. Synesthesia is when 2 senses are confused with each other. And this is a remarkable synesthetic moment in this stanza. I'm not sure I know of anything like it. The light is being compared to sound, cathedral tunes, the bong, bong, bong of the carillon bells, which is being compared because when one feels those bells in one's gut, being compared to heft, to heaviness. So we have sight, light, tunes, hearing, heft, feeling, all combined to describe this light. There's a certain slant of light, winter afternoons, that oppresses like the heft of cathedral tunes. Heavenly hurt it gives us. We can find no scar but internal difference where the meanings are. That is where the meanings are. Inside, when things are different. And I find the ambiguities in this poem overwhelming. I don't know what to do other than to call attention to it. The hurt it gives us is heavenly. That is, we'll discover in the next stanza, it's sent to us from heaven. I mean, she grew up in a religious community. She was herself not religious. And yet the hurt we have makes us something more than brute beasts. It makes us something like denizens of heaven. Heavenly hurt it gives us. The hurt is inside. And so inner darkness is, it's not, you can't point to the scar and say, this is where I got injured. We get injured inside by the sense of endings, finality. None may teach it any. No one can teach this hurt anything. It's just going to come. It's also no one can tell you the hurt is coming. You can't teach it. Not anyone. It's going to come. Tis the seal despair, and seal again is incredibly ambiguous. We seal envelopes, we close them down. Despair closes down. But that word, to seal an envelope, comes from something like what I have on my hand here, a seal ring and people would put hot wax on folded over paper, press the seal down, and it bore the imprint of the sender. So despair is sent us from the air, from nothingness, but also maybe from, there's a residual religious feeling around her from the Godhead. And the affliction comes from the emperor, who's God, but it also marks us out as imperial, having this special kind of feeling that maybe dogs and robins and cats can't have. And then this ending, Because there's a slant of light, and when it comes, the shadows are very lengthened. Which you can see with my hands. And then the shadows lengthen so much that they become all-encompassing darkness. When it comes, the shadow listens. The landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. This is when it comes, it's the slant of light. When it comes, the landscape listens. Shadows hold their breath. When it goes, the slant of light is like the distance on the look of death. And I think, again, there's an ambiguity to these last two lines. That distance on the look of death is both death coming closer as the light plunges us into darkness, but it's also the distance death is from us as we have to continue, like in I had to grease my shoulder, as we have to keep going, living our life, even though we have come to recognize that loss and endings are part of life. It's a great book. Okay, now we're heading into our conclusion, and the poems get a little lighter. I have a friend named Greg Galanti who edited a book of Anglo-Saxon poems, and much to my astonishment, I studied Anglo-Saxon poetry, but I found half the poems of Anglo-Saxon are riddles. I had great fun with riddle poems, and this is a riddle poem, just like the Anglo-Saxon poems. It's supposed to guess what the narrow fellow in the grass is. I'm sure you can all guess. The narrow fellow in the grass occasionally rides. You may have met him, did you not? His notice instant is. The grass divides as with a comb. A spotted shaft is seen, and then it closes at your feet and opens farther on. Well, yes, right now, right? It's a snake. It slithers along, and the grass opens, and then he slithers on and is gone. He likes a boggy acre. He lives in swamps. A floor too cool for corn. But when a boy and barefoot, let me see if I can. I more than once at noon, after I know it from by heart, have passed, I thought, a whiplash, unbraining in the sun, and stooping to secure it, it wrinkled, and it was gone. Being cold-blooded, snakes, when it's sunny, like the sunny souls in warm rocks. And now she's very romantic, right? Several of people, nature's people I know, and they know me, I feel for them a transport of cordiality. It's very rhymy. And I get along with that beasts of the field and the beasts of everywhere. I just like a lot of nature's creatures. And this ending, it's so stunning, I can't explain it. That's how stunning it is. I can't explain that last line. You just gotta feel it. But never met this fellow, whether anybody's with me or not. Never met this fellow, attended or alone, without a tighter breathing and zero at the bone. I used to sometimes talk about how your bones feel like they're turning to jelly, but it's more than that. It's a fear so deep and so all-encompassing, and so paralyzing, and so, it just wipes us out, zero at the bone. I suppose you could read this allegorically as, knowledge poems, but I don't think it's about a snake and fears of snakes, and I think it goes beyond that to that zero at the bone, which is what Emily Dickinson, observing herself with scrupulous exactness, sometimes has felt, and she really does pay attention to what's going on in herself. This is another poem of attentiveness, but this is kind of more fun. She's watching the funeral go on in her small town of Amherst. There's been a death in the opposite house as lately as today. I know it by the numb looks of such houses have away. The house is not bustling as it normally does. Somebody's died. The neighbors rustle in and out, and surveillance calls. The doctor drives away. I have nothing to do now. The person's dead. A window opens like a pod, abrupt mechanically. Somebody opens a window and it's
It's not like to get air, it's to air out that room the person died in. And it's kind of mechanical. Somebody flings a mattress out, the children hurry by, they wonder if it died on that. I used to when a boy. So kids are saying, yeah, you died on that, throw that mattress out. Excuse me. I love this dance. So the poem is turning very satiric here. The minister goes stiffly in as if the house were his and he owned all the mourners now and little boys besides. I mean, it is true. At funerals, ministers or rabbis or imams, they take control of everything. So I'm in charge here. I'm going to figure out how we're going to deal with this. And you mourners are going to do what I tell you to do. And you kids who are giggling over the mattress, stop that, guys. I mean, it's this ownership of the religiosity. We need to deal with that. And then the milliner, also going to suit this, let's say it's a man out in his best suit or a woman in her best dress. And then it's just so funny and funny. And the man of the appalling trade. Well, yeah, that's the undertaker who deals with poles, which are the sheets thrown over coffins. And then the man of the appalling trade to take the measure of the house. Oh, I mean, a howl when I read this line. Yeah, I suppose he's measuring out the body so he knows how big the coffin needs to be. He's also figuring, I wonder how much these people can pay. And then the milliner and the man of the appalling trade to take the measure of the house. There'll be that dark parade, and I copied this down. We will get in the fourth of these courses to Elizabeth Bishop, and she has a poem, which I wasn't going to include, but I guess I'll have to, called The Bite. And it ends with what she didn't choose this for her tombstone, but people put it on it for her, and I think it's appropriate. All the untidy activity continues, awful but cheerful. And I think we have that awful but cheerful in this line here too. There'll be that dark parade. I mean, it's a funeral procession, it's like a parade. Well, it's dark, somebody has died, and it's also all in black. There'll be that dark parade of tassels and the coaches soon. It's easy as a sign, the intuition of the news in just a country town. So it's a description of a New England town and a funeral. And I guess we could make more of it. And maybe we could, but I love the carefulness with which she is observing the social world around her. And so we'll end up with this last poem, which I find immensely funny. I know you probably didn't read it that way. I heard a fly buzz when I died. Now, I don't think that we can report back on what that is like, because when we die, we go into a world without words, and there's no reporting back. So I think this is meant as a satiric poem. It's not her actual death. It's a satiric poem, I think. And I showed this picture of the fly. I won't show it too long, but just so you notice, the flies actually have a carapace that's bluish greenish, and she's going to talk about a blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. That's where the blue comes from. I heard a fly buzz when I died. The stillness in the room is like the stillness in the air between the heaves of storm. Right? So between the thunderclaps, there's this waiting for the next thunderclap, and all the people in the room they're all still waiting for what's going to happen next. And they all stop crying because this is going to be the moment when the person dies and their soul goes up to heaven, and maybe God or the angels will be there in the room for them to see or feel that moment between life and death. The eyes around had run them dry, the breaths were gathering firm for that last onset when the king be witnessed in the room. I will my keepsakes signed away, what portion of me be assignable. Right? Everything she has. She's dying here. Everybody's saying, God is coming, but take
off or so. And then it was there interposed a fly with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me, and then the window failed, and then I could not see to see. It is possible, and some of you can read it this way, I'm not saying it's wrong, to see this fly as the first attempt at flight of the soul into its new world, its new grounds. And then it was there interposed a fly with blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz. It's a great line. It sounds like what it is describing. It's onomatopoetic. Right, a blue, uncertain, stumbling buzz between the light and me. I can't see anymore. I can see the fly. And then the window failed, and then I could not see to see. And the poem ends with wordlessness, because after death there are no words. But the funny part of this, or for me the funny part, is the fly is, what do flies feed on? They are carrion. They feed on dead flesh, just as vultures come down to feed on dead groundhogs. The fly has said, oh, this person who's lying here is now dying, and I'm going to get first shot at eating up whatever I can find. As I said, I find it pretty funny, because I think she's poking fun of the pretensions of people who think that death is this august occasion where God appears and something momentous happens, and all that happens is her sight grows less, and she cannot see to see. In reading this, I thought about another of my favorite poems. I'll end with this, but we shouldn't quote another poem in Emily Dickinson, but this is called The Last Words of My English Grandmother by William Carlos Williams. And I don't have to explain the poem to you. His grandmother's dying, and the house is a little dirty, and she's carted off in an ambulance. And the end of this poem is, I think, exactly as Dickinson sees it here, and then the windows failed, and then I could not see to see. So these are the last words of my English grandmother by William Carlos Williams, who doesn't rhyme at all, but he writes in 4-line stanzas like Dickinson. There were some dirty plates and a glass of milk beside her on a small table near the rank, disheveled bed. Wrinkled and nearly blind, she lay and snored, rousing with anger in her tones to cry for food. Give me something to eat! They're starving me! I'm all right, I won't go to the hospital! No, no, no! Give me something to eat! Let me take you to the hospital, I said, and after you're well, you can do as you please. She smiled. Yes, you do what you please first, then I can do what I please. Oh, oh, oh! Oh, she cried as the ambulance men lifted her to the stretcher. Is this what you call making me comfortable? By now her mind was clear. Oh, you think you're smart, you young people, she said, but I'll tell you, you don't know anything. Then we started. On the way, we passed a long row of elms. She looked at them a while out of the ambulance window and said, what are all those fuzzy-looking things out there? Trees? Well, I'm tired of them, and rolled her head away. That's a more poignant poem about just the loss of perception. That's what death is, the loss of perception, the loss of consciousness. And the flies coming in, both blocking out her sight. She sees the fly, that they're looking for God, she sees the fly, and also the fly coming, I think, to feed on the dead meat that's about to be on the bed there. So I am done reading me through Emily Dickinson. Let me just say in conclusion, she wrote all these poems, and they are just so wonderful, so many of them. And some of them maybe not so wonderful, but my wife, Bob, and I had a teacher once who said he'd give his left arm to write any one of Emily Dickinson's poems. He was a poet. She had a gift for seeing carefully and writing with precision, and that's why I haven't dwelt on her biography. She was not someone we can look with pity upon and say, oh, she was a recluse.
she lived a life of immense richness and has left this great richness to us. And waiting for her all to get her report. So I'm done. Time is pretty much done. We have time for one or two questions if some of you want to ask them, or I don't know how we proceed here. Let me stop sharing, and there we are.